He put a padlock on my refrigerator. Not a joke. Not a note. A metal padlock, threaded through the handles like I was some stranger wandering in off the street. And when I asked him about it, he said, "If you want the expensive stuff, buy your own." I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I smiled, and called my realtor. "Now before you decide I'm some dramatic woman who overreacted over dairy products, sit with me a minute. I'm not 25 and impulsive. I'm 48. I've paid mortgages, buried parents, signed hospital forms with shaking hands. I don't make decisions in a storm. I wait. I measure. But that padlock? That was a sentence. Let me back up. The house wasn't his. It never was. It was mine, bought after my divorce, refinanced twice, painted and repainted in colors I regretted and then learned to love. A 2-story brick place with creaky stair treads and a kitchen window that sticks in humidity. I raised him there. Ethan. I still hesitate saying his name out loud when I tell this story. Not because I'm ashamed. Just because it feels strange. Like I'm talking about someone I used to know. He was 27 when he moved back in. No, wait. 26. He just turned 26 that August. I remember because I made a carrot cake and he complained there were walnuts in it. Some things don't change. He said it was temporary. Just until I get back on my feet, Mom. That phrase. Back on my feet. As if life were a chair that tipped him over. I told him yes without thinking too hard. That's what mothers do. Or at least, that's what I did. At first, it felt almost sweet. His shoes by the door again. His voice upstairs late at night. I'd hear the shower run and think, his home. There's something comforting about another heartbeat in the house. But comfort can blur things. You start adjusting in small ways. You move your tea canister because he prefers the counter clear. You stop buying the yogurt you like because he says it's weird. You swallow comments about utility bills because you don't want to sound petty. It happens quietly. I told myself it was an adjustment period. Generational differences. Independence friction. I remember standing at the sink one evening, rinsing spinach, and wondering, when does helping become enabling? Have you ever asked yourself that about someone you love? I'm curious. Not for gossip. Just reflection. There's a line, and it's thin. Anyway. The fridge incident didn't come out of nowhere. That's the part people assume. Like I walked in one day and boom, hardware store theatrics. But tension doesn't explode, it ferments. I should have noticed the way he started labeling shelves. Top shelf, meal prep. Drawer, don't touch. At first I laughed. I thought it was playful. He was into fitness, protein plans, expensive almond butter with labels I couldn't pronounce. I didn't mind. It was his money. Except, it wasn't always. Sometimes the groceries were on my receipt. And sometimes, when I reached for eggs, I'd find only 4 left and a sticky note, "Please ask. Please ask." In my own kitchen. I remember holding that note between my fingers. It was yellow. Cheap adhesive. My thumb pressed against the word please so hard it tore slightly. And I told myself, calm down. He's just trying to budget. That's what I believed then. Or maybe that's what I needed to believe. The night before the padlock, I made pasta. Nothing fancy. Olive oil, garlic, tomatoes, basil from the little pot by the window. He came downstairs, opened the fridge, and stood there longer than usual. I heard the containers shift. He didn't say anything. Just closed it a little harder than necessary. I should have asked what was wrong. I didn't. The next morning, I woke up early. Around 6:15, I think. No, closer to 6. The sky was still that grey-blue color before sunrise commits. I padded into the kitchen in socks. And there it was. A silver padlock looped through both refrigerator handles. Not huge. Not theatrical. Just deliberate. That was the moment something inside me went very still. Not angry. Not yet. Just clear. And clarity can be dangerous. I stood there for a full minute, listening to the hum of the motor behind metal I'd paid for. The house felt smaller. Like the walls had leaned in overnight. He came downstairs a few minutes later. Coffee mug in hand. Didn't look surprised. And that's when I realized this wasn't about groceries. It was about territory. And the question forming in my mind wasn't why would he do this? It was something else. Who exactly did he think he was locking out? Before the lock, before the notes, before the word please became territorial, there was a version of our house that felt steady. Predictable. I'd wake up around 6 most mornings. The floorboards near the hallway always creaked twice, not 3. I don't know why I said 3 earlier in my head. Twice, right before the kitchen opened up. I liked that sound. It told me I was home. The kitchen faced east. Morning light would slide across the countertop, catching dust I pretended not to see. I kept a ceramic bowl near the stove for mail. Bills mostly. Grocery lists folded in half. My handwriting leaned to the right when I was tired. Ethan moved back in during late summer. The cicadas were loud that year. Or maybe I just noticed them more because the house wasn't quiet anymore. He brought 3 suitcases and a gaming chair that barely fit through the doorway. I remember him laughing as we angled it sideways, scraping paint off the trim. He said he'd lost his apartment because the company downsized. It's temporary, he told me again while setting up his desk upstairs. 6 months, maximum. 6 months felt reasonable. I'd been alone since the divorce. Well, not alone. I dated here and there. But the house had mostly been mine. Quiet evenings. Dishes washed right after dinner. Thermostat set exactly where I liked it. When he came back, I shifted without announcing it. I bought more milk. Switched to his brand of coffee because he said mine tasted burnt. Moved my knitting basket from the couch because he needed space for his laptop. Small things. I told myself this was what flexibility looked like. And to be fair, he wasn't disrespectful at first. He mowed the lawn twice without being asked. Fixed the loose cabinet hinge. Paid for takeout one Friday night and insisted it was his treat. We sat at the dining table that night, cartons open, soy sauce staining the wood I'd meant to refinish for years. He talked about applying for new jobs. Remote positions. Startups. Words like equity and growth potential. I nodded. I believed him. That's the part that's hard to admit now. I truly believed this was a temporary chapter. A little D2 before he launched into his adult life fully. But then months passed. The job applications slowed. The gaming chair squeaked late into the night. The grocery bills crept up, not dramatically, just enough that I noticed the total before sliding my card into the machine. And the fridge became organized. Not messy organized. Claimed. He started meal prepping every Sunday. Plastic containers lined up in rows like little soldiers. Brown rice. Chicken. Something green the Faust couldn't identify. He labeled them with painter's tape and a black marker. Monday, Tuesday, don't touch. That last one made me laugh the first time. I even teased him about it. He didn't laugh back. I remember standing by the stove, wooden spoon in hand, asking lightly, "You think I'm going to steal your broccoli?" He shrugged. "It's expensive." The way he said it. Flat. Practical. I brushed it off. But something shifted there. Not loud. Just subtle. Have you ever had that moment when a room feels the same, but you realize you're standing slightly outside of it? Like you've been moved half a step without noticing? I wonder how many of us ignore those half steps because we don't want conflict. If you've ever done that, convinced yourself it's nothing, I'd genuinely like to know. Not to prove a point. Just to understand how common that instinct is. Because mine was strong. I started asking before using things. Is this okay? Can I have one of these? And sometimes he'd say yes. Other times he'd hesitate. Just a second too long. He began buying specialty items. Imported yogurt, protein bars that cost more than steak, sparkling water in glass bottles. When I reached for one absent-mindedly one afternoon, he said, "Those are kind of pricey, Mom." Kind of pricey. I put it back. And here's where I need to be honest. I didn't confront it because part of me thought maybe he was right. Maybe I was being careless. Maybe sharing space meant adjusting more than I realized. But the house was still mine. The mortgage auto-drafted from my account every month. Property taxes. Insurance. Repairs. The roof leak last spring. That was me writing the check while he was upstairs on a video call. I never brought that up. Maybe I should have. No, that's not entirely fair. I did mention utilities once. Lightly. He said he'd transfer money soon. He didn't. And I let it go. Because I believed, truly, that this was temporary. That's what I held on to. Which is why the padlock didn't just surprise me. It cracked something I had been pretending was solid. The morning of the padlock, I didn't react right away. That surprised me more than the lock itself. I stood there in my socks, staring at the silver loop threaded through the fridge handles. It wasn't bulky. Just practical. The kind you'd use on a shed. I actually leaned closer to see the brand stamped into the metal. Master Lock. No, I think it was Brinks. I remember the letters were small and pressed deep. It doesn't matter. It was deliberate. I touched it. Cold. Solid. Real. The refrigerator hummed behind it like nothing had changed. That steady motor sound felt almost mocking. Life continuing inside a sealed space. I heard his footsteps on the stairs before I saw him. Slow. Unhurried. He didn't look confused when he entered the kitchen. Didn't look apologetic either. He poured coffee. Like this was normal. I asked, evenly, "What's this?" He didn't even glance at the fridge at first. Just stirred his mug. "I told you yesterday. The food's expensive. I can't keep replacing stuff." I searched my memory for what he meant by "told you." The night before, he'd stood at the fridge longer than usual. That was it. No conversation. No warning. Unless he'd said something under his breath and I missed it. I replayed it quickly. No. He hadn't. "I bought groceries on Tuesday," I said. "Not the stuff in there," he replied. "That's mine." Mine. The word landed heavier than it should have. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I just nodded once and said, "Okay." And here's the part one wrestled with later. I wasn't calm because I understood him. I was calm because I was observing him. There's a difference. He took a sip of coffee, scrolled his phone, then headed back upstairs. No further explanation. No apology. No acknowledgement that he had just locked his mother out of a refrigerator in her own house. The quiet that followed felt dense. I sat at the table and listened to the clock tick above the doorway. That clock has always run a little fast. 2 minutes ahead, I think. Or 3. I never fixed it. But in that moment, every second felt stretched. I tried to reason it out. Maybe he was stressed. Maybe he felt out of control in other areas of his life and this was how he regained some. Maybe I had crossed boundaries without realizing. I got up and checked the pantry. My cereal was still there. My tea. Bread. Peanut butter. So technically, I wasn't starving. But that wasn't the point. Around noon, I texted him from downstairs instead of calling up the stairs like I usually did. I'm not even sure why. Maybe I didn't want to shout. "We need to talk about the lock." He responded quickly. "It's temporary. Just until I can keep track of things better." Temporary. That word again. I stared at the message longer than necessary. The typing bubble appeared once, then disappeared. He didn't add anything. That's when suspicion began to replace confusion. Because this wasn't about organization. It wasn't about budgeting. It wasn't even about food. It was about control. I walked through the house slowly that afternoon, noticing things I hadn't registered before. The way his packages piled near the front door. The extra extension cord running under the hallway rug. The thermostat adjusted 2 degrees lower than I set it. Small shifts. Patterns. Had I missed other signs? Probably. I'm not claiming innocence here. I tend to avoid friction. Always have. Even in my marriage, I let things slide longer than I should have because I believed peace was more important than being right. But peace built on imbalance isn't peace. It's postponement. By evening, I was standing in the backyard near the fence line. The grass needed trimming. The air smelled faintly like rain. I remember thinking, is this a moment you let pass, or is this the line? Do I confront this directly? Demand the lock be removed? Or do I step back and look at the larger picture? That's the fork I stood at. Because removing a padlock is easy. Addressing what it represents is not. I went back inside and looked at the fridge again. The metal caught the overhead light. It didn't look angry. It looked settled. Like it belonged there. And that unsettled me more than anything. So I asked myself something quietly, standing alone in that kitchen. Do I argue over access? Or do I reconsider ownership altogether? I didn't have the answer yet. But I knew this wasn't about groceries anymore. That afternoon, I decided not to confront him. Not yet. I wanted to understand the shape of what I was dealing with before I pushed against it. There's a difference between reacting and responding. I've learned that the hard way over the years. So I started paying attention. Really paying attention. I opened the mail bowl by the stove and sorted through the envelopes instead of just stacking them. Electric bill, higher than last month. Water, up again. Internet, upgraded to a faster plan. I hadn't requested that. I checked my bank app at the table, glasses low on my nose. The grocery charges stood out first. Not because they were outrageous. Just consistent. Larger. Organic labels. Imported brands. I remembered buying almond flour 2 weeks ago. I don't bake with almond flour. He does. I tried to recall if he'd handed me cash for that. I thought he had. No, wait. He said he would. He never actually did. That realization didn't hit like a punch. It landed slower than that. Like weight settling onto a shelf already bending. I walked upstairs while he was out later that evening, said he was meeting a friend. His door was open. I stood at the threshold for a moment, debating whether it was invasive to step in. Then I reminded myself, this is my house. Still felt strange. The room looked different than I remembered. More permanent. Wall-mounted shelves I hadn't approved. LED light strips along the ceiling edge. A second monitor on the desk. Packages stacked in the corner, unopened, some addressed to him, some to both of us. One caught my eye. It was a small box from a home security company. I picked it up. Lightweight. Already opened. I scanned the label. Smart lock. My stomach tightened. I checked the front door that night before bed. Still my regular deadbolt. But the thought lingered. Was he planning more changes? Upgrades, he'd probably call them. Or was he slowly rewriting the rules of the space? The next morning, I tested something small. I made breakfast, eggs, toast, sliced avocado. I left the pan soaking and went to fold laundry. When I came back, the pan had been moved to the side. Not washed. Just relocated. The fridge was still locked. He came downstairs around 9, earbuds in. Opened the lock with a small key from his pocket. Took out a container. Closed it again. No comment. I watched his hands. Steady. Comfortable. That's when the emotional acceleration began, not dramatic, not explosive, but undeniable. I started replaying conversations from the past few months. Mom, you wouldn't understand how expensive groceries are now. Mom, I need space to focus. Mom, I can't feel stable if things keep disappearing. Things. He meant food. But I started to wonder if he also meant authority. I sat in the living room that afternoon, the house quiet except for the faint clicking of his keyboard upstairs. I looked around at the furniture I'd chosen, the framed photos on the wall, him at 8, missing his front tooth. Him at 17, graduation cap tilted sideways. Where had the shift happened? Was it when I stopped correcting him? When I started asking permission? When I convinced myself that discomfort was maturity? I need to say something plainly here. It hurt. Not the lock itself. Not the groceries. The positioning. If you've ever felt displaced in your own space, by someone you love, you know the particular ache I'm talking about. It's not loud. It's hollow. And if you've experienced that kind of subtle erosion, I hope you'll share it. Not to stir resentment. But because naming it matters. I checked the property file that evening. The folder I kept in the hallway cabinet. Deed, insurance, mortgage statements. My name alone. I ran my fingers across the paper. It grounded me. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I called my realtor. Not to list the house. Not yet. Just to ask a question. What's the market like right now? She answered casually, like we were discussing weather. Strong. Houses on your street are moving fast. I leaned against the counter while she talked numbers. Comparable sales. Interest rates. Demand. My eyes drifted to the fridge. Still locked. I didn't tell her about that. After I hung up, I stood in the kitchen longer than necessary. The afternoon light had shifted warmer. Dust floated near the window. I felt something settle inside me, not anger. Not revenge. Clarity. And clarity, when it arrives after confusion, feels almost like relief. But relief has edges. Because once you see the dynamic clearly, you can't unsee it. That night, lying in bed, I asked myself the question I'd been circling. Was I raising a man? Or sustaining a dependency that no longer respected me? And beneath that, quieter but sharper, if he believed this house functioned under his authority, what would happen if I reminded him whose name was on the deed? I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was furious. I wasn't pacing the floors or rehearsing speeches in my head. It was quieter than that. My mind kept organizing details like files being sorted into folders. Utility bills. Grocery receipts. The smart lockbox upstairs. Around 3 in the morning, maybe closer to 2:30, I got up and walked to the kitchen for water. The padlock caught the dim light from above the stove. It looked almost decorative in the dark. That's when the shift happened. I realized I had been negotiating inside a framework he had quietly built. Asking permission. Explaining myself. Justifying my presence. In my own house. I stood there, hand on the counter, and asked myself something I hadn't wanted to phrase directly. If I remove the lock, what changes? He might apologize. He might argue. He might accuse me of overreacting. But the underlying dynamic? That wouldn't disappear. It would just go underground. So I stopped thinking about the refrigerator. I started thinking about the house. By mid-morning, I had called my realtor again. This time the conversation was different. What would it take to list quickly? I asked. She didn't hesitate. Minimal staging. It's in good shape. Inventory's low. I walked from room to room while she talked. Not emotionally. Logistically. The hallway needed a fresh coat of paint. The backyard fence leaned slightly on the left side. No, right side. I always mix that up. It's the side closest to Mrs. Delaney's garden. That one. I took notes. Planning steadies me. There's something almost therapeutic about measuring square footage and discussing market value when your personal life feels tilted. Numbers don't care about pride. By the afternoon, I'd scheduled a walkthrough for the next day. I didn't tell Ethan. Not yet. Part of me questioned that choice. Was I being reactive? Drastic? Would a direct conversation have been more mature? Possibly. I sat at the dining table with a yellow legal pad, pen tapping against the paper. I wrote 2 columns. Confront and renegotiate. Reclaim and reset. The first option required his cooperation. The second required only mine. That realization felt heavy. And freeing. Let me be clear, I wasn't trying to punish him. I wasn't plotting some dramatic lesson. I was evaluating the situation the way I would if it involved anyone else. If a tenant locked shared appliances without discussion. If an adult occupant contributed inconsistently. If boundaries were redrawn unilaterally, what would I advise a friend to do? That question matters. Because sometimes we give others clearer guidance than we allow ourselves. I walked upstairs in the early evening and knocked on his door. He paused his game. I could hear the click of the headset being lifted. Yeah. I'm having someone look at the house tomorrow, I said evenly. For what? He didn't sound alarmed. Just distracted. An evaluation. Silence. Then, why? I considered my words carefully. Because I'm reassessing some things. He frowned. That seems random. Random. I almost corrected him. Almost explained the sequence of events as if presenting evidence. But I didn't. It's not random, I said. It's measured. He stared at me for a moment, trying to gauge something. Then he shrugged. Okay. That was it. No curiosity beyond inconvenience. No awareness of the symbolism. I went back downstairs and exhaled slowly. This is where I'll admit something uncomfortable. Part of me hoped he would ask more questions. Push back. Express concern. Something that suggested he understood the gravity of what I was doing. He didn't. The realtor arrived the next afternoon with a clipboard and a polite smile. Ethan stayed upstairs. I could hear faint movement, but he never came down to greet her. We walked through each room. She commented on natural light. Storage space. The updated kitchen appliances, which I had paid for 3 years ago, by the way, after saving for nearly 12 months. When we reached the fridge, she glanced at the lock. That part of the decor, she asked lightly. I held her gaze. Temporary. She nodded without pressing. After she left, I sat alone in the living room. The house felt different already. Not sentimental. Just transitional. Here's the values-based question I wrestled with that evening. Is it more loving to protect someone from consequences? Or to let them experience independence fully, even if it's uncomfortable? I know opinions will vary on that. Some of you might think I escalated too quickly. Others might believe I waited too long. I'm not claiming moral high ground here. I'm asking, at what point does self-respect require action, not discussion? Because by the end of that week, I had signed the listing agreement. Quietly. And the sign went up 3 days later. The sign went up on a Tuesday. I remember because the trash bins were still at the curb. No, wait. That's not right. Trash day is Wednesday. So it must have been Monday afternoon. The bins were already pulled back in. See? Even now the details blur a little. What doesn't blur is Ethan's face when he pulled into the driveway and saw the word sold staked into the lawn. Not for sale. Sold. It had moved fast. Faster than I expected. 3 showings. 2 offers. 1 above asking. The market had been ready. He stepped out of his car slowly. Backpack slung over one shoulder. He looked at the sign, then at the house, then back at the sign again like it might rearrange itself into something less permanent. I was watering the front hydrangeas. Calm. Hose in hand. What is that? He asked. His voice was flat. Not loud. Just disbelieving. It means the house is sold, I said. He laughed once. Short. Very funny. I'm not joking. The silence that followed wasn't dramatic. No wind gust. No cinematic pause. Just suburban quiet. A dog barking somewhere down the street. You can't just sell the house, he said. I can, I replied. It's in my name. He opened his mouth, closed it again. His eyes flicked toward the kitchen window. Toward the fridge inside. I could almost see the calculation happening. When? He asked. Closing is in 30 days. 30 days. His voice rose now. That's insane. Where am I supposed to go? I turned off the hose carefully. Coiled it halfway before answering. You said you wanted independence. That's not what I meant. I nodded once. I know. He ran a hand through his hair. Pacing now. Quick steps across the driveway. Back and forth. You're doing this because of the food thing, he said. I didn't answer immediately. It wasn't just the food. It was the framing. The entitlement. The shift in authority. But explaining that in the heat of this moment would have turned into a debate. This house no longer feels like mine, I said instead. He stared at me like I'd spoken another language. It's always been yours, he shot back. You never said it wasn't. I almost smiled at that. Almost. Ownership isn't just paperwork. It's atmosphere. You locked the refrigerator, I said quietly. That was about groceries. No, I replied. It wasn't. He threw his hands up. So you're just kicking me out. There it was. The narrative forming. I'm selling my house, I corrected. You're an adult. 30 days is more notice than most landlords give. That stung him. I could see it. The word landlord shifted the dynamic in a way he didn't like. Viewers might say I was cold in that moment. Maybe I was. I won't pretend I was overflowing with softness. But I wasn't cruel. I wasn't shouting. I was steady. And steady can feel sharp. He walked past me into the house. The door shut harder than necessary. Not slammed. Just firm. Inside, he went straight to the fridge. I followed. He unlocked it. Stared at the contents like they might offer him leverage. You're overreacting, he said. I leaned against the counter. Am I? Yes. It was just food. I tilted my head slightly. Then it shouldn't be a problem finding another kitchen. That's the only line I delivered with edge. He locked the fridge again. The sound of the metal clicking shut echoed louder than before. We stood there facing each other. 2 adults. Same height, almost. I hadn't noticed that before. When did he get that tall? 17? No, earlier. 15, maybe. Irrelevant. What do you want me to say? He asked finally. I considered that. An apology would have been easy. A promise to remove the lock. An acknowledgement. But I realized something in that moment. If he offered those now, they'd be transactional. A negotiation to preserve comfort. I want you to understand, I said. Actions redraw lines. He didn't respond. The rest of that week moved quickly. Boxes appeared. Phone calls were made. He toured apartments. I overheard fragments of conversations through thin walls. Yeah, my mom sold the place. No, I didn't see it coming. That part lingered. Didn't see it coming. I suppose I hadn't either. On the final day before closing, the fridge was unlocked. No padlock. It sat on the counter, key beside it. He didn't mention it. Neither did I. But some gestures arrived too late to reverse momentum. 30 days passed. And then we handed over the keys. The house echoed on the last morning. That's what I remember most. Not the arguments. Not the sign. The echo. Furniture had been moved out the day before. The couch gone. Dining table disassembled. Even the curtains were down, rods exposed like bare ribs along the walls. Sound traveled differently. My footsteps bounced back at me from empty corners. Ethan had already taken most of his things to his new apartment across town. 3rd floor. No elevator. I helped him carry 2 boxes the previous weekend. Not many words exchanged. Just the sound of cardboard scraping against stairwell paint. He didn't ask me to come inside once we reached his door. I didn't insist. That's something I've thought about since. Whether I should have stepped in anyway. Claimed space the way I used to when he was small and his bedroom was a mess of Legos and laundry. But adulthood redraws lines. And I wasn't going to cross into his new place uninvited. The morning of closing, he stood in the kitchen, unlocked, quiet kitchen, and looked around. Did you ever even like this house? He asked suddenly. The question caught me off guard. I leaned against the counter where the fridge used to hum. It had been unplugged. Doors open. Empty shelves. Yes, I said. I did. He nodded once. No sarcasm. Just processing. There were things we didn't say. He didn't apologize directly for the lock. I didn't demand one. We existed in that strange in-between where conflict has already reshaped the terrain, and words can't quite restore it. We loaded the last box into his car. He paused before getting in. I didn't mean for it to turn into this, he said. I studied his face. There was frustration there. Maybe confusion. A hint of something softer underneath. I know, I replied. And I did know. That's the complicated part. He hadn't woken up intending to disrespect me. He hadn't plotted dominance over breakfast containers. He'd reacted from his own fear, of scarcity, of instability, of feeling behind his peers. But intent doesn't erase impact. He drove off first. I stayed behind to meet the buyers. A young couple. Eager. Smiling. They walked through the front door with energy that felt almost bright against the quiet walls. I handed over the keys. Metal to palm. That small transfer held more weight than I expected. Not grief exactly. Just finality. After they left, I stood alone in the driveway for a moment longer than necessary. The hydrangeas needed trimming again. I wouldn't be the one to do it. I moved into a smaller townhouse 2 weeks later. 1 floor. No stairs. The kitchen is compact. Efficient. No room for extra shelving or silent territory shifts. Sometimes, late at night, I wonder if I would handle it the same way again. Would I sit him down immediately when the labels started appearing? Would I insist on a written agreement about expenses? Would I remove the padlock myself and force the confrontation? I don't know. And I think that's honest. If you look back at a decision that changed your relationship with someone, would you repeat it exactly? Or adjust the approach while keeping the boundary? There's no perfect replay button. Ethan and I still speak. Weekly, usually. Short calls. Surface updates. He pays his own rent now. Buys his own groceries. I don't ask about his refrigerator. The distance between us feels measured. Not icy. Just recalibrated. What was lost? Ease. That automatic closeness that comes from shared space. What endured? Respect. Eventually. And what permanently changed was something quieter. I no longer mistake tolerance for love. That shift didn't come with fireworks. It came with a padlock. A few months after the move, Ethan invited me over for dinner. His place smelled like fresh paint and something tomato-based simmering too long. I stood in his small kitchen, smaller than mine had been, and watched him move around the stove with careful precision. Measuring. Staring. Checking the oven timer twice. There was no padlock on his refrigerator. He opened it casually to grab basil. Left it open a second longer than necessary. Almost like he was proving something without saying it. I didn't comment. We ate at a narrow table by the window. The chairs didn't quite match. One leg wobbled slightly, front right, I think. Or maybe it was the back left. I remember steadying it with my foot at one point. He noticed and slid a folded napkin underneath. "Still figuring things out," he said. A simple sentence. But it held more accountability than any apology would have. We talked about neutral things at first. Work. Traffic. The neighbor who plays loud music. Then, after a pause, he said, "I didn't realize how much everything costs." I almost laughed. Not at him. Just at the full-circle nature of it. "Most people don't," I replied. He looked at his plate for a moment. I shouldn't have locked it. There it was. Not dramatic. Not rehearsed. Just factual. I nodded once. It wasn't about the food. "I know," he said quietly. "That conversation didn't fix everything. It didn't rewind time or restore the version of us that existed before territory became tension. But it did something better. It placed responsibility where it belonged. On both of us. Because here's the part I've had to own, I allowed the dynamic to shift slowly without speaking up. I adjusted. I absorbed. I minimized my discomfort to keep peace. Peace at my own expense. And that's not noble. It's avoidant. Selling the house wasn't revenge. It wasn't theatrical parenting. It was the clearest boundary I could draw once I realized the old ones had blurred beyond recognition. Would a conversation months earlier have prevented it? Maybe. I can't say with certainty. Human behavior doesn't run on clean if-then equations. But I do know this. Self-respect has to be visible. Not implied. Not assumed. Visible. Sometimes that visibility feels extreme to the person benefiting from your silence. Sometimes it feels extreme to you. If you're listening to this and thinking, "I would have handled that differently," you might be right. There are dozens of paths through conflict. Some softer. Some firmer. None universally correct. So let me ask you something that doesn't have an easy answer. When someone you love crosses a boundary in your own space, do you prioritize preserving closeness or preserving clarity? And is there a way to do both? I don't claim expertise here. I'm still learning. 48 years old and still recalibrating what strength looks like. It doesn't always look loud. Sometimes it looks like a real estate listing signed at a quiet kitchen table. Ethan and I aren't estranged. We aren't overly sentimental either. We're aware of each other's edges. Of the cost of assumption. That's growth, I think. Not perfect. Just conscious. And if I ever walk into someone's home again, his or anyone else's, I'll know exactly where I stand. Because I won't pretend confusion when the lines start moving. That lesson was expensive. But it was mine. So that's my story, folks. If it resonated with you, go ahead and hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I want to know how far Kimura's voice travels. Respect without boundaries is just delayed resentment.